Hello, book aficionados, and get ready for a literary feast that will leave you craving more. Join me as we savor the rich flavors of nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. Liking my videos is like giving me a virtual high five, and following my channel is like becoming part of an awesome community. So, if you're enjoying what you see, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to join the conversation. Section 1. The novel opens with an editor's note claiming that the following pages were found among the papers of Antoine Roquentin. The pages are presented in a diary format. The editor suggests that Roquentin began his diary in January 1932 following his return from the Far East, Central Europe, and North Africa. He moved to the seaside town of Beauville in order to write a book about the Marquis de Roban. Roquentin's introductory notes establish his intent to keep a diary. He feels that something has changed in the way he sees objects, but he cannot quite place his finger on exactly what. He hopes that a diary will help him better understand what is going on, specifically to see, classify, and determine the extent and nature of the change. He recalls an odd sensation while holding a stone a few days earlier, but is not sure whether the odd feeling came from the stone or himself. Despite his feelings of disgust and being afraid of the stone, he is wary of exaggerating the events he records in his diary. Indeed, he soon writes that his odd feelings were nothing but a passing moment of madness and that there is no longer any need to continue with his diary. Nevertheless, the next entry, dated January 29, 1932, opens with Roquentin's realization that something strange has happened to him. He first thought that it was nothing but a passing moment gives way to a permanent feeling of uneasiness around objects and people. He hopes that it is nothing but an abstract change, but soon begins to worry that he is the one who has changed little by little, overwhelmed by a sudden transformation. He recalls his whimsical decision to leave Vietnam and return to France, terrified that it was actually a precursor to his current state of mind. The next day, however, he becomes resigned to his fate, realizing that his solitary lifestyle has changed him. He notices that living alone has prevented him from both having friends and simply communicating with other people. When he looks inside himself for answers, he finds nothing. Even when he has sex with Françoise, a local barmaid, very little is said between them. Roquentin feels that he is purging himself of a certain nostalgia rather than feeling pleasure. Yet he does acknowledge that he would be lying to himself if he began to think that nothing new has happened to him. When he looks at a glass of beer or a soggy piece of paper lying in the street, he is unable to touch them despite his desire to do so. He does not feel free. Thinking back on the strange feeling he had while holding the stone, he recalls a nausea of the hands. Roquentin attempts to divert his angst with historical research on the Marquis de Roban, a mysterious aristocrat who lived around the time of the French Revolution. Yet, Roquentin's research begins to bore him. 10 years earlier, he had been fascinated with the story of the Marquis, but now feels that he is writing a work of pure conjecture that has nothing to do with the real Marquis at all. His work inevitably returns Roquentin to himself and his emerging disgust at the outside world. Specifically, the changing appearance of objects in the light of the sun makes him feel uneasy. When he tries to focus on the mystery of Roban, he can't help but look at himself in the mirror, alarmed that he doesn't recognize his own face. Section 2. Roquentin begins the next section in the grips of what he calls the nausea. He previously thought that his odd feelings around objects and people only occurred when he was alone or walking in the street. But now they also occur in his favorite cafe. Overcome with anxiety, he exclaims in his diary. Things are bad. Things are very bad. Things are very bad. He finds that he no longer recognizes people, but only sees hands, eyelids, hair, cheeks, dirty skin, and enormous nostrils. His head begins to spin, and he tries to steady his feet on the ground to keep from vomiting. Roquentin is especially disgusted at a bartender's purple suspenders, which he thinks keep changing color. In an attempt to calm his nerves, Roquentin asks a barmaid to play one of his favorite songs, a ragtime record called Some of These Days. Before the music begins, he worries that the music will not help him pass the time. He thinks that time is too large and can't be filled up without it disintegrating between one's fingers. Indeed, each note of the music is born at the same time that it dies. He decides that he must not only accept their deaths, but that he must will it. Everything. He knows the song by heart and anticipates the lyrics. Nothing is a surprise. But when the lyrics actually begin, the nausea vanishes. Roquentin writes that the melody crushes the time of the real world, making him feel in the music. When the music ends, Roquentin doesn't know what to do with himself. He wants to go see a movie but ends up wandering the streets. He shies away from the light, following dark avenues towards what he calls a black hole. Something about the black nothingness of the Beauville streets at night catches his attention, but he is not sure exactly why or how. He just knows that he feels more comfortable in the dark. The nausea only occurs in the light. The next day, he tries to divert his attention from the nausea by intermittently reading Balzac's Eugénie Grandet and researching Rolban. At the library, he runs into the self-taught man, who thinks that he can learn all there is to know by reading the entire contents of the Beauville library in alphabetical order. The sheer predictability of the self-taught man's behavior reminds Roquentin that traditional definitions of time have become meaningless to him under the influence of the nausea. I can no longer distinguish the present from the future. He finds the self-taught man very boring, but they end up spending a lot of time together out of sheer loneliness. The self-taught man admires Roquentin's sense of adventure, but Roquentin realizes that man's obsession with adventure is nothing but an attempt to catch time by the tail. Roquentin cannot recapture his past adventures in the Far East, and as a result, feels forsaken in the present. Section 3. Roquentin finds himself unable to complete his research on the Marquis de Rolban. He used to enjoy Rolban's overt lies and letters to contemporary aristocrats, but Roquentin now feels that Rolban is lying to him personally. He had hoped that by researching Rolban, he would discover the truth about him just as easily as he could learn about someone who was still alive. Yet, not only is Rolban dead, but Roquentin thinks any understanding of the past to be a futile pursuit at best. The Rolban he thought he knew was nothing but a man of his own creation, who ended up disgusting him as much as he disgusts himself. Roquentin's attention turns to women instead. He tries to fondle Françoise under a cafe table, but is thoroughly disgusted by the idea of sex. He imagines ants and other vermin crawling up her leg, while a sudden attack of the nausea makes him want to vomit. He then receives a letter from his old lover, Annie. They have not seen or spoken to each other since they parted ways in Vietnam 5 years earlier. She writes that she is in Paris and desperately needs to see him. Roquentin is first excited to see her, but then recalls all the trouble they had communicating with each other. He realizes that it is completely his decision what happens next. He can either go see her or do nothing. He says that he staggers under the weight of his responsibility. When he tries to remember more about Annie, he realizes that he can never have any real memory of her. He feels that it is impossible to think of someone in the past. Roquentin concludes that the past does not exist. In its place, there is only an enormous vacuum. He then comprehends that if one cannot learn from the past, they cannot learn from the present. Historians try to describe current events and people in terms of a convenient but meaningless past. Lenin was a Russian Robespierre, while Robespierre was a French Cromwell. In the end, one is left with relative comparisons that signify nothing. Roquentin wants to free himself from the meaningless past by perceiving objects and people on their own terms. Roquentin soon realizes that one of the things that has been bothering him is the meaning of existence. While roaming through the halls of the Beauville Portrait Museum, he is confronted with hundreds of painted eyes, both looking at him and recalling the experiences that made them worthy portrait subject. Roquentin thinks that these men were so afraid of death that they relied on their past experiences to give meaning to their lives. But Roquentin decides that the past is useless since death can come at any moment. Why try and hide from it? Section 4. Roquentin's final refusal to research Rolban gives him a greater understanding of the meaning of existence. He thinks the past does not exist at all, while the present is the only thing that does. His foray into Rolban's past was nothing but a vacation from existence. Roquentin's memories of his research have become an empty vacuum just as Rolban has returned to the nothingness from where he came. He realizes that anything he wrote about Rolban in the past was pure fiction and better suited for a novel. Roquentin's newfound appreciation and awareness of his existence puts him at odds with the people he meets and sees. While sitting at a cafe, he is disgusted with the robot, like behavior of the people around him. He thinks that they are trying to hide the enormous absurdity of their existence from themselves. They are either lying to themselves about whom they are going to sleep with, or stuffing their mouths with food. Roquentin, however, righteously declares that, unlike everyone else at the cafe, he does not hide his existence from himself, knows that he exists. His disgust causes him to get into a heated debate with the self-taught man about humanism. The self-taught man believes that all rational behavior can be explained by man's love for his fellow man. He proudly declares that he is a socialist and naturally loves every man and woman in the world. But Roquentin ridicules him for loving symbols and labels that are just essences and thus do not really exist. The two men part on poor terms as Roquentin is overcome by the nausea. He is afraid to touch anything for fear that it will make him sick. Holding a knife, he is shocked by the raw sensation of its handle. Suddenly, he understands what the nausea is about, his fear of existence. Anything he touches no longer has any essence. It just exists. His revelation climaxes when he sees the root of a chestnut tree under a park bench. Roquentin can find no words to describe the root. It is simply there. He discovers that existence usually hides itself from view or thought with the facade of its essence, or attributes, or attribute. For Roquentin, the word existence no longer evokes an abstract category, but an unexplainable nothingness that has no reason to be there. The second he tries to explain its size, color, or function, Roquentin discovers that he is no longer talking about the root, but about things that don't exist. He thinks back on the bartender's purple suspenders and realizes that they were never purple, but something that looked like a color. He concludes that an object's essence is a simplified idea to hide its existence. The uneasy feeling of his nausea is a result of colors, tastes, and smells that are not real. His feelings of nausea also come from what he calls contingency. He thinks that people attribute essences to objects to supply a reason for their existence. But he claims that there is no necessary reason for something to exist. It is there by accident. Since human existence is contingent, meaning anything can happen at any moment, Roquentin finds no reason for existence. It is just a free gift. Section 5. Roquentin had moved to Beauville in order to study the Robon archives, so after abandoning his research, he sees no reason to remain there. He plans to first visit his ex-lover Annie in Paris, return to Beauville to pack up his belongings, and then return to Paris indefinitely. He secretly hopes that he can both explain his nausea to Annie and that they can get back together. As he waits for his train, he feels ready for an adventure. He and Annie meet as planned, but they are very awkward around each other. Roquentin is disappointed to find that Annie has grown old and is no longer as attractive as he remembered. He is also surprised that she is the mistress of a number of men who pay for her apartment. Roquentin can never completely understand what Annie is talking about, as she intermittently laughs at his awkwardness. She says that she is very happy to see him because he never changes. She calls him her milestone, claiming that she needs him to remain the same so she can tell how much she has changed over the years. Their conversation turns to their past relationship. Roquentin can remember very little of the things they did together, feeling overwhelmed by Annie's precise memory. Annie is obsessed with the past. She remembers entire passages from plays and constantly studies French history. She also speaks of perfect moments, which she describes as past events whose importance she embraced while they were happening. But she thinks that they no longer exist. She can't recreate emotions that are in the past. Roquentin suspects that she has come to similar conclusions as him about the nature of time and existence. He describes his nausea and discovery that existence precedes essence, but Annie doesn't agree with him at all. She asks him to leave, and he reluctantly obeys. Back in Beauville, Roquentin prepares to return to Paris for good. He is sad that he and Annie cannot be together, but a part of him had expected nothing to come of their meeting. He feels very lonely, especially while walking around the city streets, but takes comfort from his awareness of existence. He wants to say goodbye to the self-taught man, but sees him fondling a small boy in public. Other people see the offense and chase the self-taught man away. Left to himself, Roquentin goes back to his old cafe one last time and asks to hear his favorite record, Some of These Days. As he listens to the song over and over again, he resolves to write a novel that will have nothing to do with the question of existence. He thinks that it might clarify who he was in the past and prevent him from remembering his life with disgust.